The police officer looked me dead in the eye and said, "Sir, you're under arrest for criminal trespassing on your own property." And that's when I realized my HOA had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. 7 a.m., my own driveway. Coffee steam rising while this cop pulls out handcuffs like I'm some fugitive. The metallic click echoed as my neighbor's Ring doorbell captured every humiliating second. Across the street, Bethany Clearwater, our HOA dictator, practically glowed with satisfaction. That trademark smirk plastered on her face like she'd just evicted orphans. I handed the officer my business card. His face went corpse white in 0.3 seconds. Those handcuffs vanished faster than free donuts at a police convention. Bethany forgot to Google her target. I'm Judge Marcus Thornfield. After 25 years destroying criminals in my courtroom, dismantling one corrupt HOA sounds like a weekend hobby. What would you do if your HOA weaponized police against you? Drop your location below. Your HOA nightmares probably seem cute compared to this. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this mess. My name is Marcus Thornfield, and 6 months ago, I was living a completely different life. My wife Elena and I had our dream house in the city until cancer decided to crash our retirement party. After 25 years of marriage, I watched the strongest woman I knew fade away in a sterile hospital room that reeked of disinfectant and shattered dreams. Elena always said she wanted to live somewhere quiet when we retired, somewhere with big trees and neighbors who actually talked to each other. So after she passed, I sold our city place and bought a modest colonial in Willowbrook Estates for $340,000. Nothing fancy, just white shutters, a front porch, and this massive oak tree that drops acorns like nature's own personal artillery range every fall. The plan was simple. Heal, spend time with my daughter Sophia and her kids, maybe learn to fish or at least figure out how to operate a grill without setting anything on fire. What I didn't plan on was meeting Bethany Clearwater. Picture the most stereotypical HOA tyrant you can imagine, then add a real estate license and a god complex. Bethany's 48, drives a white BMW with Horelty vanity plates, because apparently shame isn't in her vocabulary, and treats our neighborhood like her personal fiefdom. She's got this perfectly manicured everything. Lawn that looks like carpet, nails that could cut glass, and a husband Dale who works construction and clearly learned long ago that "yes, dear" are the two most important words in his vocabulary. Within 72 hours of moving in, I learned the unofficial Bethany Clearwater commandments. Garage doors must close within 30 seconds. She times them. Trash cans vanish by sunset on pickup day or face her wrath. And heaven help your soul if your mailbox shows even a microscopic hint of rust. This woman literally patrols the neighborhood with a clipboard like some suburban dictator conducting inspections. I've watched her crouch next to fire hydrants with a tape measure, timing how long people take to grab their newspapers. It's like living under surveillance by someone whose greatest achievement was probably perfect attendance in middle school. But here's the thing about spending 25 years as a judge. You develop this incredibly annoying habit of actually reading legal documents before signing them. So naturally, I pulled up our HOA covenants the day my boxes arrived. Riveting bedtime reading. If you enjoy discovering how much freedom people cheerfully surrender for the privilege of being told what color they can paint their shutters. The first violation notice appeared on my windshield exactly 3 days after I committed the heinous crime of parking my 15-year-old Honda Accord in my own driveway. The paper was crisp white with official-looking letterhead that probably cost more than my car's monthly insurance, demanding I remove my aesthetically offensive vehicle that diminishes neighborhood property values within 24 hours or face $50 in daily fines. I stood there in my driveway, morning coffee sending steam spirals into the crisp autumn air, reading this bureaucratic masterpiece twice to make sure I wasn't having some kind of grief-induced hallucination. The car runs perfectly, passes inspection, and honestly looks better than half the rust buckets parked outside the courthouse where I work. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I called Queen Bethany herself. "Clearwater Residence," she answered, like she was operating a luxury hotel instead of living in a subdivision. "Mrs. Clearwater, this is Marcus Thornfield from 42 Maple. I received this violation notice about my car, but I can't seem to locate any vehicle age restrictions in our covenants." Silence. Then, "Well, there should be such restrictions. This is a quality neighborhood, Mr. Thornfield. We maintain certain aesthetic standards here." "But ma'am, according to the actual documents, I don't have time to explain basic property management principles to every new resident. The violation notice stands. Good day." Click. I stared at my phone, listening to dead air, feeling that familiar judicial itch when someone thinks established law is merely a suggestion. Elena used to laugh at that expression, the same look I'd get when some cocky attorney tried arguing with settled case law. That evening, I spread every HOA document across my kitchen table like evidence in a criminal case. The musty smell of old paperwork mixed with reheated pizza as I cross-referenced bylaws with architectural guidelines, searching for this mysterious vehicle restriction. Nothing. Not one syllable about vehicle age, condition, or appearance requirements. That's when I realized Bethany Clearwater had been improvising her own legal system. And if she was manufacturing violations against a sitting judge, God only knew what she'd been doing to everyone else. If I thought Bethany would back down after our little phone conversation, I was about to learn just how spectacularly wrong a sitting judge could be. The woman didn't just double down, she went full scorched earth. Week 2 of living in suburban paradise began with Bethany conducting what she graciously called routine property inspections. Every morning at exactly 8:15, I'd hear the aggressive click-click-click of her heels on the asphalt, marching around the neighborhood with a clipboard like some kind of residential drill sergeant reviewing troops for combat readiness. Tuesday morning, I watched from my kitchen window as she crouched next to my fence with an actual measuring tape. I'm not exaggerating. This woman was on her hands and knees in a $100 pantsuit, measuring the distance between my fence posts like she was preparing evidence for the International Court of Justice. The autumn leaves crunched under her knees as she scribbled notes with the intensity of a war correspondent. "Excuse me, what exactly are you doing?" I called out, stepping onto my porch with my coffee. She stood up, brushing dirt off her perfectly pressed slacks with obvious irritation. "Ensuring compliance with setback requirements, Mr. Thornfield. Your fence appears to be improperly positioned." "Ma'am, it's been there for 15 years. Age doesn't retroactively create legality." 20 minutes later, violation notice number 2 appeared on my door like a legal summons. My fence was allegedly 2 inches closer to the property line than municipal code allows. Fine, $25. Funny thing, I'd reviewed those municipal codes during my judicial tenure, and residential fence setbacks had a 6-inch tolerance margin. Wednesday brought violation number 3. Garden hose improperly stored on the side of my house instead of secured in the garage. Another $25 for the crime of owning functional outdoor equipment. Thursday escalated to mailbox positioning. Apparently mine was 2.3 inches closer to the driveway than architectural guidelines permit. $50 this time. I had to admire her commitment to decimal precision in her completely fabricated measurements. Friday delivered my personal favorite citation, unsecured newspaper delivery creating visual blight, because I hadn't retrieved my morning paper by 8 a.m. sharp. $75 for the heinous offense of reading news at my own pace. By the following Tuesday, I had 14 separate violations totaling $680. Each citation arrived with the same crisp letterhead, the same imperious tone, and the same complete divorce from anything resembling actual regulations. But here's where Bethany made her first catastrophic miscalculation. After 25 years of reviewing legal documents, I've developed this annoying judicial habit of actually reading procedural requirements. Every comma, every clause, every seemingly insignificant detail that separates legitimate authority from elaborate fiction. That evening, I spread all 14 violations across my dining room table next to the HOA bylaws like evidence in a criminal trial. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with Elena's favorite vanilla candle as I cross-referenced each citation against the actual governing documents, a process I'd learned from countless property dispute cases where HOA boards assumed nobody would challenge their creative interpretations. Article 9, Section 4 practically jumped off the page. All violation notices must be delivered in writing no less than 48 hours prior to the alleged infraction date. Every single one of Bethany's violations had been delivered the same day as the supposed offense. I remembered a case from 3 years ago where this exact procedural failure invalidated an entire HOA enforcement action. But the real gem was Article 7, Section 3. Violation notices must include specific reference to the applicable covenant section and municipal code citation. Bethany's citations used vague language like improper storage and visual blight, with 0 specific rule references. In my courtroom, that kind of sloppy documentation would get a case thrown out before lunch. The next morning, I drafted what I like to call my educational response. 3 pages of legal analysis citing Morrison v. Sunset Hills HOA, and 2 other property rights precedents, methodically explaining why every single violation was procedurally defective and therefore invalid. I hand-delivered my response to Bethany's house at exactly 8:15 a.m., timing it perfectly with her daily inspection patrol. She answered the door in a pink bathrobe, hair in curlers, looking like I'd just interrupted her preparation for a state dinner. "What's this supposed to be?" she demanded, scanning the first page with obvious confusion. "Legal analysis of your citation process, Mrs. Clearwater. Turns out you've been violating your own procedural requirements." Her face cycled through several fascinating color variations, pink to red to something approaching eggplant. "You can't just—" "Legal analysis. I'm the HOA president." "Yes, ma'am, and according to your own bylaws, I'm requesting a formal hearing before the full board." "That's completely unnecessary for obvious infractions." "Actually, it's mandatory according to Article 7. I've highlighted the relevant sections for your convenience." She slammed the door with enough force to knock her decorative autumn wreath into her prize-winning petunias. But the real game-changer came that afternoon when Margaret, my next-door neighbor, called with information that transformed this from personal harassment into something much bigger. "Marcus, honey, I saw you standing up to Bethany this morning. Please tell me you're not backing down from that woman." "Not planning on it, Margaret." "Why do you ask?" "Because she's been terrorizing everyone for years. I've got $2,300 in accumulated fines for my wind chimes being acoustically disruptive. My husband's afraid to even hang a bird feeder anymore." That revelation hit me like a legal brief to the face. This wasn't about my Honda Accord or even my fence measurements. Bethany Clearwater had been running a systematic extortion operation against the entire neighborhood, banking on people being too intimidated or uninformed to challenge her fictional authority. Time to show her what happens when you try to bulldoze someone who actually understands the rules. Apparently, my little legal education session didn't sit well with Queen Bethany. Instead of backing down like any reasonable person would after getting schooled on their own bylaws, she decided to escalate to what I can only describe as weapons-grade suburban warfare. 3 days after our doorstep confrontation, I received a notice for an emergency board meeting, scheduled for the following evening. 24 hours notice for an emergency that somehow involved my fence measurements and garden hose storage. Having presided over municipal disputes for years, I recognize this classic tactic, rushing controversial decisions through before anyone could mount proper opposition. The meeting was held in Bethany's living room, which felt like walking into a furniture showroom where someone had accidentally spilled a human family. Everything was perfectly arranged, nothing looked actually lived in, and the air reeked of that aggressive vanilla air freshener that screams, "I'm hiding something unpleasant." Only 3 board members showed up: Bethany, her devoted sidekick Janet from Elm Street, and Bob Henderson, who looked like he'd rather be getting audited by the IRS. 4 empty chairs sat around Bethany's dining table like missing witnesses to this procedural disaster. "Thank you all for coming to address our neighborhood crisis," Bethany began, consulting handwritten notes that looked like she'd drafted them during a wine-fueled planning session. My 15-year-old Honda had apparently evolved into a neighborhood crisis requiring immediate legislative intervention. This woman had the audacity to elevate my perfectly legal car into a community emergency. "I moved to implement emergency aesthetic standards requiring all vehicles manufactured before 2015 to be garaged at all times," she announced, reading from her notes like she was declaring martial law in suburbia. Bob Henderson shifted uncomfortably, his engineering background clearly rebelling against this procedural nightmare. "Bethany, we don't have quorum. We need 4 members minimum for any—" "This is an emergency situation, Bob. Normal procedures are suspended." Janet nodded with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never read the bylaws she was supposedly enforcing. I bit my tongue, remembering countless cases where board members operated in blissful ignorance of their actual authority. The vote was 2-1, with Bob wisely abstaining from this legal fiction. Bethany declared victory with Napoleonic grandeur, then announced the emergency rule would be retroactive to my Honda, effective immediately. $50 per day until compliance, with potential property liens after 30 days. I sat through this entire performance in fascinated silence, taking mental notes like I was watching a masterclass in procedural violations. Elena used to say I got a particular expression when watching someone dig their own legal grave. Apparently death hadn't changed my courtroom face. 2 weeks later, the next official board meeting arrived, and this time I brought reinforcements. Winston, my 70-year-old retired court clerk, was a walking encyclopedia of parliamentary procedure with 4 decades of experience keeping legal meetings actually legal. The man was Robert's Rules of Order incarnate, with a mischievous streak that enjoyed dismantling bureaucratic incompetence. Good evening, everyone, I announced, walking into the community center with printed agendas and a briefcase that made Bethany's eyes narrow with obvious suspicion. Mr. Thornfield, this meeting isn't about your personal vendettas, she began. But Winston was already rising with the dignified authority of someone who'd spent 40 years refereeing legal proceedings. Point of order, Madam President. The emergency meeting held 14 days ago lacked proper quorum and violated Article 6 procedural requirements. Any decisions made are therefore null and void. Bethany's face cycled through that familiar spectrum, pink to red to something approaching burgundy. Emergency powers override normal quorum. Respectfully incorrect, Winston continued with the cheerful precision of a master craftsman dismantling shoddy work. Emergency powers are strictly limited to immediate safety threats or property damage. Aesthetic vehicle preferences don't qualify. Additionally, you failed to maintain meeting minutes as required by state law. Watching Winston work was like observing surgical precision applied to bureaucratic malpractice. Every procedural shortcut, every ignored requirement, every corner Bethany had cut was methodically exposed with devastating thoroughness. I moved to overturn the emergency vehicle restriction as procedurally invalid and beyond board authority, I announced. The vote was 4-3 in my favor, with Janet suddenly finding intense interest in her fingernails and Bob looking relieved to participate in an actual legal proceeding. But the evening's real bombshell came afterward, when Dale Clearwater approached me in the parking lot with the nervous energy of someone carrying explosive secrets. He kept glancing toward Bethany's BMW, making sure she was safely out of earshot. "Marcus, I need to show you something." Dale's voice carried the guilt-ridden tone of a man approaching confession. "I've been trying to work up the courage for months." He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, showing me photographs of credit card statements. She's been using the HOA account for personal expenses, hair salon, BMW lease payments, even her real estate license renewal. When I asked about it, she said it was administrative compensation for services rendered. The statements revealed a systematic pattern, small amounts regularly diverted, always with plausible-sounding explanations. During my judicial career, I'd seen identical evidence patterns in embezzlement prosecutions, the gradual escalation from occasional borrowing to systematic theft. "Dale, this could be criminal fraud. Why show me?" His shoulders sagged with obvious relief at finally sharing this burden. "Because she's completely lost it since you started challenging her authority. Last night she was researching ways to neutralize threats to board leadership. Her exact words, Marcus, 'I'm genuinely scared she's planning something that'll destroy both our lives.' That conversation transformed my understanding completely." This wasn't simple power trip harassment anymore. Bethany was a desperate embezzler whose cover was unraveling, making her infinitely more dangerous than any garden-variety HOA tyrant. The real war was just beginning. Bethany's response to losing the board vote was both predictable and spectacularly stupid. Instead of cutting her losses and hoping I'd lose interest, she decided to research her enemy. Apparently nobody had ever taught her that when you're in a hole, the first rule is to stop digging, preferably before you hit bedrock and start excavating your own grave. Within 48 hours of our board meeting victory, I received a certified letter that made my morning coffee taste like liquid vindication. The thick envelope arrived with all the ceremonial weight of official doom, but the letterhead reading State Judicial Ethics Board only made me smile. Someone had filed a formal complaint alleging I was abusing judicial authority to intimidate a lawful homeowners association. The complaint, signed by one concerned neighbor but written in Bethany's unmistakable style of bureaucratic hysteria, accused me of leveraging my position as a sitting judge to circumvent legitimate HOA enforcement actions, and creating an atmosphere of legal intimidation that undermines community governance. The prose had that distinctive flavor of someone who'd clearly consulted a legal thesaurus, but hadn't bothered learning what the words actually meant. I had to admire her audacity. Most people would think twice before filing false allegations against a judge with 25 years of unblemished service. But Bethany had apparently decided that her best defense was a preemptive nuclear strike against my reputation, like bringing a water balloon to a gunfight. While I wasn't worried about the ethics investigation, they're conducted by actual professionals who understand legal procedures, Bethany wasn't content with just trying to destroy my career. Over the next week, anonymous flyers appeared on car windshields throughout the neighborhood, like some kind of suburban propaganda blitz. "Corrupt judge terrorizes local HOA," screamed the headline in bold red letters, followed by a breathless account of how I was abusing my position to avoid legitimate community standards. The flyers included my home address, judicial district, and encouraged residents to contact the state ethics board to report this abuse of power. Someone had invested serious time and money into this little character assassination campaign. The smell of fresh ink on cheap paper mixed with autumn morning air as neighbors discovered these literary masterpieces under their windshield wipers. Margaret called me Tuesday morning, her voice carrying that special blend of outrage and amusement reserved for watching someone else make spectacular mistakes. "Marcus, honey, did you see these ridiculous flyers? Everyone's talking about them, and most people are absolutely furious. At Bethany, not you. How's the neighborhood taking it?" Like you'd expect decent people to react to obvious lies, Bob Henderson's talking about starting a petition to remove her from the board. The Johnsons asked for your phone number so they could apologize for this harassment. And Mrs. Violet wants to know if you need character witnesses because apparently she's got stories about Bethany that would curl your hair. While Bethany was busy conducting her amateur propaganda campaign, I was methodically building my actual legal response. My attorney friend Rebecca agreed to review the HOA's corporate status, and what she discovered was more delicious than I dared hope. "Marcus, when was the last time this HOA filed their annual nonprofit reports with the state?" Rebecca asked during our coffee meeting, spreading documents across the table with the precision of a forensic accountant examining a crime scene. I assumed they were current. Why? Because according to state records, Willowbrook Estates HOA hasn't filed required documentation in 3 years. Their corporate status is suspended, which means they have about as much legal authority as my neighbor's book club. The implications hit me like a perfectly timed judicial ruling. An HOA operating without proper state registration was like a security guard trying to make arrests. All costume, zero authority. During my years handling municipal cases, I'd seen this exact scenario invalidate thousands of dollars in HOA fines and liens. But Rebecca's investigation uncovered an even more interesting detail. Look at this incorporation document from 2018. See this clause about board member misconduct? I leaned over to read the fine print that someone had clearly hoped would never be relevant. Any board member who materially misuses their position or violates fiduciary duties may be immediately removed by majority vote of the membership. Rebecca, if Dale's allegations about the credit card abuse are accurate, then Bethany's been violating her fiduciary duties for months. And if the HOA isn't properly registered, any enforcement actions they've taken could be legally void. She's been running a fake court. The irony was absolutely beautiful. While Bethany was trying to destroy my reputation with fabricated ethics violations, she'd been committing actual violations that could land her in criminal court. The Judicial Ethics Board investigation concluded exactly as I'd expected. Their letter arrived on official letterhead with findings that warmed my judicial heart. After thorough review, this board finds no evidence of ethical violations. Judge Thornfield's actions appear entirely consistent with a private citizen exercising his legal rights, but the letter's final paragraph made my entire week. However, this investigation revealed concerning evidence of false statements in the original complaint. A copy of our findings has been forwarded to the State Attorney General's office for potential prosecution. Bethany's nuclear option had backfired with the force of a cartoon dynamite explosion, and now she was facing potential criminal charges for filing false reports against a public official. The neighborhood's response was even more satisfying. A petition demanding Bethany's immediate removal gathered 67 signatures in 2 days, and the local newspaper requested an interview about Judge Battle's corrupt HOA president. But Dale's latest report made me genuinely concerned. She's been researching you obsessively, Marcus. Last night I heard her talking about teaching that judge a lesson he'll never forget. When desperate people start talking about teaching lessons, it's time to start watching your back. Rebecca's deeper dive into the HOA's legal structure uncovered something that transformed this entire situation from suburban comedy to potential federal crime. What started as a simple document review had evolved into a forensic financial investigation that would make any prosecutor's mouth water. "Marcus, you need to see this," Rebecca announced, spreading bank statements across my kitchen table like evidence in a RICO case. The morning sunlight streaming through my windows illuminated numbers that told a story of systematic theft disguised as administrative expenses. Remember that construction bond I mentioned? When Willowbrook Estates was developed 8 years ago, the original builder deposited $50,000 with the HOA as security for community improvements. That money was supposed to sit in an escrow account, earning interest, until the board decided how to spend it on amenities like playground equipment, landscaping, or the community center renovation everyone's been talking about. I leaned over the documents, my judicial training immediately recognizing the pattern. Let me guess, the money's not there anymore. Oh, it gets so much better than that. Rebecca's voice carried the satisfaction of an accountant who'd just caught someone cooking the books. The escrow account shows a current balance of $3,200. But here's the fascinating part. Look at these withdrawal authorizations. She handed me a stack of bank documents that read like a masterclass in creative embezzlement. Over the past 5 years, money had been systematically drained through administrative consulting fees, board compensation adjustments, and my personal favorite, emergency community beautification expenses. $47,000 in authorized withdrawals, all signed by the HOA president, Rebecca continued. And here's the kicker. Every single withdrawal coincides with major personal expenses in Bethany's life. New BMW lease, community beautification, real estate license renewal, administrative consulting, that Mediterranean cruise she took last spring, emergency board training seminar. The documentation was so thorough it was almost insulting. Bethany had kept meticulous records of her own embezzlement, apparently confident that nobody would ever bother auditing a suburban HOA's finances. During my years on the bench, I'd seen career criminals show more caution than this woman's financial record-keeping. But the smoking gun was still coming. Dale brought me this yesterday, Rebecca said, producing a manila envelope with shaking hands. He said he couldn't live with the guilt anymore. Inside were photographs of personal receipts, spa treatments, jewelry purchases, luxury restaurant bills, all paid for with the HOA credit card. But the most damning evidence was a handwritten ledger in Bethany's own writing, documenting what she called management compensation adjustments that corresponded exactly to the escrow withdrawals. The woman had literally kept a diary of her own embezzlement. Rebecca, this isn't just HOA mismanagement. This is criminal fraud involving a federally insured construction bond. Gets worse. The original bond was backed by a federal housing development grant, which means this could be prosecuted as federal wire fraud. We're talking potential prison time. Dale's timing in revealing this information suddenly made perfect sense. His wife wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president, she was a desperate criminal whose cover was unraveling faster than cheap yarn. Her increasingly erratic behavior, the false ethics complaints, the propaganda flyers, all of it was the panicked response of someone trying to destroy the person most likely to discover her crimes. There's one more thing, Rebecca added quietly. The HOA's insurance policy specifically excludes coverage for board member criminal activity. If this goes to trial, Bethany would be personally liable for full restitution plus legal fees. We're talking about financial ruin. That revelation changed everything. Bethany wasn't just fighting to maintain her petty authority anymore. She was fighting to avoid prison and complete financial destruction, which made her infinitely more dangerous than any garden-variety HOA tyrant. A cornered embezzler with nothing left to lose was exactly the kind of person who might decide that eliminating the threat was preferable to facing the consequences. I was no longer dealing with a wannabe suburban dictator. I was dealing with a desperate criminal who saw me as the only thing standing between her and complete catastrophe. Time to start treating this situation with the seriousness it deserved. The next morning, I did what any experienced judge would do when facing a desperate criminal. I assembled a team of people who actually knew what they were doing. My kitchen table had transformed into a war room, complete with legal documents, financial records, and enough coffee to fuel a small law firm. Rebecca arrived first, carrying a briefcase that looked like it could survive a nuclear attack. "I've been up all night researching embezzlement statutes and HOA law," she announced, spreading fresh legal briefs across my table with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just discovered buried treasure. Winston showed up 20 minutes later with a folder of parliamentary procedure documents and a mischievous grin. "Heard we're dismantling a corrupt board. Haven't had this much fun since I helped overturn that rigged city council election in '98. Margaret knocked on my back door carrying a plate of homemade cookies and a yellow legal pad covered in notes. "I've been talking to neighbors, honey. Turns out half the subdivision has horror stories about Bethany's made-up violations. Mrs. Patterson paid $1,500 in fines for her garden gnomes being inappropriately whimsical. The final member of our unlikely coalition was Dale himself, who arrived looking like a man who'd finally decided to stop carrying the weight of someone else's crimes. His construction background had given him detailed knowledge of the original development contracts, and his access to Bethany's personal records made him our most valuable asset. "Here's what we're dealing with," Rebecca began, consulting her notes like a prosecutor preparing opening statements. "Embezzlement from a federally backed construction bond carries a potential sentence of 5 to 10 years in federal prison. But here's the interesting part. If we can prove the theft was systematic and premeditated, which these records clearly demonstrate, the sentencing guidelines could push that to 15 years. She paused to let that sink in. During my judicial career, I'd seen white-collar criminals break down completely when they realized the true consequences of their actions. The difference between thinking you're clever and discovering you're facing federal prison time tends to clarify people's priorities rather dramatically. The legal strategy is straightforward, Rebecca continued. We present the evidence at the next board meeting, give Bethany one opportunity to resign gracefully and agree to full restitution. And if she refuses, we file criminal complaints with both state and federal prosecutors. Winston leaned forward with the tactical mind of someone who'd spent 40 years navigating political bureaucracy. The parliamentary approach is equally simple. We call a special meeting, present a motion of no confidence, and vote her out. But here's the key. We need to follow proper procedures exactly, because any technical violations could give her grounds to challenge the results. Margaret's contribution was perhaps the most important. I've been organizing the neighbors, and we've got serious momentum. 73 signatures on the removal petition so far, and 3 qualified residents ready to run for the board. Janet from Elm Street actually called me crying, saying she never knew about the financial irregularities and wants to help fix this mess. Dale's information was the most revealing. Bethany's been getting increasingly paranoid since your ethics complaint backfired. She's convinced this is some kind of judicial conspiracy to destroy her. Last night she was researching whether judges can be sued for harassment and looking up information about restraining orders. The picture emerging was of someone spiraling into desperation, making increasingly poor decisions while digging herself deeper into legal jeopardy. But Dale's next revelation was what really concerned me. She's also been asking weird questions about your schedule, Marcus. When you leave for work, when you get home, whether you have security cameras. Yesterday, she drove past your house 3 times during lunch. That information triggered every alarm bell from my years dealing with criminal defendants who'd made threats against court personnel. Desperate people facing serious prison time sometimes decided that eliminating witnesses was preferable to facing consequences. We need to document everything and move fast, I decided. Rebecca, prepare formal complaints for both prosecutors. Winston, schedule the special board meeting with proper notice to all residents. Margaret, keep organizing neighbor support. And Dale, I need you to keep detailed records of Bethany's behavior and statements. But the most important preparation was practical security. After years on the bench, I'd learned that threats from desperate criminals should always be taken seriously. I contacted my old bailiff friend Rodriguez, who recommended a discreet security company that specialized in protecting judges and prosecutors. The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Present overwhelming evidence, offer one chance for graceful surrender, and if refused, unleash the full weight of the legal system. Most rational people would accept resignation and restitution over federal prison. The problem was that increasingly desperate embezzlers aren't always rational. We had 1 week to coordinate everything before the special board meeting, 1 week to gather the community, prepare the evidence, and hopefully resolve this situation before Bethany's desperation drove her to do something truly stupid. Because the alternative, waiting for a cornered criminal to make the first move, wasn't something any of us wanted to contemplate. Time to show Bethany Clearwater what happened when you tried to steal from a community that finally decided to fight back. Apparently, my security preparations were more necessary than I'd hoped. Bethany's response to losing community support wasn't strategic retreat. It was full-scale psychological warfare with a dash of criminal vandalism thrown in for good measure. Tuesday morning, I discovered my Honda looking like it had been the victim of a particularly vindictive sugar fairy. Someone had poured what appeared to be several pounds of granulated sugar into my gas tank, along with slashing both front tires with surgical precision. The sweet smell of crystallized revenge mixed with the acrid odor of deflated rubber as I surveyed the damage in my driveway. But here's where Bethany's criminal mastermind plan hit a snag. My new security system had captured everything in glorious high-definition detail. At 2:17 a.m., a white BMW with Horelty plates crept past my house like a suburban spy mission gone wrong. The footage showed someone in a dark hoodie approaching my car with a bag of sugar and what appeared to be a kitchen knife. Not exactly criminal genius material, but definitely enough for a police report. Officer Martinez, who responded to my vandalism call, watched the security footage with the weary expression of someone who'd seen every possible variety of neighborhood dispute. "Sir, this is pretty clear-cut destruction of property. You want to press charges?" "Absolutely." "An officer, there's something else you should know about the suspect." I handed him the financial documents Rebecca had prepared, explaining the ongoing embezzlement investigation. Martinez's expression shifted from routine vandalism to serious criminal interest as he reviewed the evidence of systematic theft. "Judge Thornfield, this looks like organized criminal activity. I'm going to need to involve our white-collar crime unit." While the police were processing evidence of Bethany's midnight sugar rampage, she was busy escalating her harassment campaign through official channels. Wednesday brought a visit from the city building inspector, responding to anonymous complaints about my supposedly unpermitted garden shed. The inspector, a competent professional named Johnson, spent 15 minutes examining my shed before shaking his head with obvious irritation. "Sir, this structure predates the HOA formation by 8 years. It's grandfathered under municipal code, and frankly, whoever filed this complaint wasted everyone's time." Thursday's entertainment was even more creative. Dale called me with barely controlled panic in his voice. "Marcus, she tried to get me to lie to the police about you threatening her. She wanted me to say you came to our house making violent threats about what happens to people who cross judges." "Please tell me you didn't." "Hell no. I recorded the conversation on my phone. She literally coached me on what to say, including specific quotes about how you were going to destroy her life and make her disappear." The woman's completely lost touch with reality. The recording Dale provided was a prosecutor's dream, clear evidence of soliciting false testimony, witness tampering, and filing false police reports. Bethany's voice was unmistakably frantic as she tried to manufacture evidence of judicial intimidation. But the real escalation came Friday afternoon, when Bethany attempted what I can only describe as amateur bribery. She appeared on my doorstep at exactly 5 p.m., dressed in her most professional outfit and carrying an envelope that practically screamed, "Desperate criminal making poor choices." "Mr. Thornfield, I think we've both let this neighborhood dispute get out of hand," she began, her voice carrying the forced calm of someone practicing lines in a mirror. "I'd like to propose a mutually beneficial resolution." The envelope contained a cashier's check for $3,500, made out to me personally, along with a typed letter offering to withdraw all HOA violations and cover your legal expenses if I would reconsider pursuing this matter further. I had to admire the audacity. This woman was attempting to bribe a sitting judge with embezzled HOA funds while being investigated for embezzlement. It was like watching someone try to put out a fire with gasoline-soaked rags. "Mrs. Clearwater, are you attempting to offer me money to drop a criminal investigation?" Her face went through that familiar color progression, but this time with added panic. "It's not a bribe. It's compensation for inconvenience caused by administrative misunderstandings." "I see. And this administrative misunderstanding involves you pouring sugar in my gas tank?" "I don't know what you're talking about." The security footage suggests otherwise. That's when she made her final desperate play. "You can't use that footage. It's illegal surveillance of a private citizen." I explained with judicial patience that security cameras on my own property recording criminal activity were perfectly legal. Her attempt to challenge basic property law while standing on my doorstep after vandalizing my car was almost impressively stupid. The conversation ended with Bethany storming off my porch, leaving behind the cashier's check and a written confession to attempted bribery. I called Officer Martinez immediately, adding bribery charges to the growing list of criminal complaints against our former HOA president. That evening, Dale reported that Bethany had spent hours online researching judicial immunity and how to file complaints against corrupt judges. She'd also been making increasingly erratic statements about taking matters into her own hands and showing everyone the truth about that judge. The situation had officially moved beyond civil dispute into criminal desperation territory. Bethany was accumulating felony charges faster than parking tickets, and her behavior suggested someone who'd completely abandoned rational decision-making. 1 week until the special board meeting, and our neighborhood embezzler was spiraling toward a complete breakdown that could endanger everyone involved. If I thought Bethany had hit rock bottom with the sugar and tire vandalism, I was about to discover that desperate embezzlers have remarkably creative ways of digging deeper holes. Her final week of freedom turned into a masterclass in how not to handle criminal investigations. Monday morning brought the most audacious move yet. Bethany filed a police report claiming I had threatened her with physical violence and judicial retaliation. According to her sworn statement, I had allegedly cornered her in the grocery store parking lot, grabbed her arm, and whispered menacing threats about what happens to people who cross federal judges. The timing of this alleged incident was particularly impressive. considering I had been presiding over a criminal sentencing hearing in my courtroom at the exact moment she claimed I was terrorizing her at the Kroger. Court security footage, judicial calendar records, and about 30 witnesses could verify my whereabouts, but Bethany apparently hadn't considered that judges maintain pretty detailed schedules. Officer Martinez called me Tuesday morning with barely concealed amusement in his voice. "Judge, I hate to bother you with this nonsense, but Mrs. Clearwater insisted we take her statement. Could you provide documentation of your whereabouts Monday at 2:30 p.m.? I was sentencing a drug dealer to 18 months. Would you like the court transcript? That would be helpful. Also, she's demanding a restraining order hearing. Apparently, she's retained an attorney who specializes in domestic violence cases." The restraining order hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning in front of Judge Patricia Hawkins, a colleague who'd known me professionally for 15 years. Walking into that courtroom felt like watching someone attempt amateur surgery with kitchen utensils, technically possible, but guaranteed to end badly. Bethany appeared with her attorney, a well-meaning public defender who clearly hadn't been briefed on the full scope of his client's legal problems. The poor man looked like he'd rather be defending serial killers than trying to get a restraining order against a fellow judge based on obviously fabricated evidence. "Your Honor," the attorney began with obvious reluctance, "my client seeks protection from ongoing harassment and intimidation by Judge Thornfield, who has allegedly used his judicial position to threaten physical violence." Judge Hawkins reviewed Bethany's sworn affidavit with the expression of someone reading a particularly implausible fairy tale. "Mrs. Clearwater, you claim Judge Thornfield threatened you in a grocery store parking lot at 2:30 p.m. last Monday?" "Yes, Your Honor. He grabbed my arm and said terrible things about what happens to people who interfere with federal investigations." "I see. Mr. Prosecutor, do you have any response to these allegations?" My attorney Rebecca stood with a stack of documents that could choke a horse. "Your Honor, at the time of this alleged incident, Judge Thornfield was conducting a sentencing hearing in courtroom 3B. We have court transcripts, security footage, and witness testimony from 37 people who observed him on the bench. The hearing lasted exactly 12 minutes. Judge Hawkins denied the restraining order request and issued a stern warning about filing frivolous claims that bordered on perjury. Bethany's attorney looked like he wanted to disappear into the courthouse floor. But the real bombshell came after the hearing, when the prosecutor's office finally took action based on our evidence package. Detective Sarah Violet from the White Collar Crime Unit called me Wednesday afternoon with news that made my judicial heart sing. "Judge Thornfield, we've completed our preliminary investigation into Mrs. Clearwater's financial activities. The evidence you and Mrs. Rebecca provided is substantial enough for formal charges. We're issuing arrest warrants for embezzlement, wire fraud, filing false police reports, and attempted bribery of a public official. When's the arrest? Tomorrow morning. We wanted to give you advance notice in case she tries anything desperate when she realizes her situation." That warning proved prophetic. Dale called me Thursday evening in a state of complete panic. "Marcus, she's lost it completely. She found out about the arrest warrant. I think someone at the courthouse tipped her off. She's been throwing things, screaming about conspiracies, and talking about making sure that judge pays for destroying her life." "Dale, where is she now?" "That's what scares me. She left the house 2 hours ago with a suitcase and her laptop. She was muttering something about fixing this problem permanently and showing everyone the truth. Marcus, I think she's planning something really stupid." The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. A desperate embezzler facing federal prison time had exhausted all legal options and was now talking about permanent solutions to her judicial problem. In my years on the bench, I'd seen this pattern before. Criminals who decided that eliminating witnesses was preferable to facing consequences. I immediately called Detective Violet and Officer Martinez, explaining the situation and Dale's concerns about Bethany's increasingly violent rhetoric. They agreed to increase patrols around my neighborhood and put out a BOLO alert for Bethany's white BMW. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone desperate enough to file false police reports and attempt bribery might be capable of much worse when facing complete destruction of her life. The special board meeting was scheduled for tomorrow evening. Either Bethany would be in custody by then, or we'd be dealing with a cornered criminal who'd decided she had nothing left to lose. Neither option felt particularly comforting. Friday evening arrived with the kind of tension that makes experienced judges check their security twice and keep their phones fully charged. The special board meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the community center, and by 6:30, the parking lot looked like a small-town festival, except instead of cotton candy and carnival games, we had angry homeowners armed with violation notices and a shared desire to watch justice finally prevail. Over 150 residents packed into a space designed for maybe 80, with local news crews setting up cameras, and Detective Violet positioned near the back door with 2 uniformed officers. The air buzzed with nervous energy, and the smell of fresh coffee mixed with anticipation and barely controlled rage. Margaret had done her job magnificently. Residents arrived carrying boxes of documentation, years of fabricated violations, illegal fines, and evidence of Bethany's systematic harassment campaign. Mrs. Patterson brought a photo album of her supposedly inappropriately whimsical garden gnomes. The Hendersons carried a detailed timeline of Bethany's increasingly creative interpretations of property maintenance codes. I sat in the front row with Rebecca and Winston, our evidence packets organized like a prosecution case ready for trial. The financial documents, bank records, and Dale's recorded conversations were neatly arranged in folders marked Exhibit A through M, enough criminal evidence to make any prosecutor smile. At exactly 7:15 p.m., Bethany arrived. She walked into that community center like a condemned prisoner approaching the gallows, but with the defiant posture of someone who'd convinced herself that sheer audacity could overcome overwhelming evidence. Her hair was disheveled, her usually perfect makeup smudged, and she carried herself with the manic energy of someone operating on pure desperation and caffeine. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, ignoring the established meeting procedures and striding to the front podium like she was delivering a keynote address. "We're here tonight because certain individuals have decided to launch a coordinated attack against your duly elected HOA leadership." The crowd's response was immediate and unmistakable, a collective groan of disbelief mixed with angry murmurs. Someone in the back shouted, "We're here because you stole our money, Bethany," but she wasn't finished with her performance. "Judge Marcus Thornfield has abused his judicial position to intimidate and harass this board, using his legal connections to manufacture false evidence and—" That's when Winston stood up with the parliamentary authority of someone who'd spent 40 years shutting down procedural nonsense. "Point of order, Madam President. You're not recognized to speak. This meeting was called to address financial irregularities and a motion of no confidence." Bethany's face cycled through that familiar color progression, but this time with added desperation. "I don't recognize the authority of this meeting. These proceedings are illegal and—" "Mrs. Clearwater," I interrupted, standing with the calm authority that comes from 25 years of controlling courtrooms. "Before you continue, you should know that Detective Violet is present tonight, and you're currently facing multiple felony charges, including embezzlement, wire fraud, and filing false police reports." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the coffee maker gurgling in the kitchen. Even the news cameras seemed to pause, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Bethany's response was everything I'd hoped for and feared. Instead of the rational surrender any sane person would choose, she doubled down with the fury of someone who'd completely abandoned reality. "That's exactly what I'm talking about," she screamed, pointing at me with trembling fingers. "This man has used his position to frame me, to destroy evidence, to—" Detective Violet stepped forward with handcuffs visible on her belt. "Mrs. Clearwater, you need to calm down. Anything you say can and will be—" "No!" Bethany's voice reached a pitch that probably registered on seismographs. "I won't be silenced by this corrupt conspiracy. I have proof that Judge Thornfield has been embezzling HOA funds and framing innocent board members." The beauty of that moment wasn't just her complete break from reality, it was watching 150 residents realize they were witnessing someone's complete psychological breakdown in real time. This was the woman who'd terrorized them with measuring tapes and clipboard inspections, reduced to shrieking conspiracy theories in front of news cameras. Rebecca stood and calmly presented the financial evidence to the crowd. Bank records, withdrawal authorizations, Dale's recorded conversations, a methodical destruction of every lie Bethany had constructed over 5 years of systematic theft. But the real mic drop moment came when I addressed the crowd with judicial calm, while Bethany continued her manic ranting in the background. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Clearwater is correct about one thing. I am a sitting judge with 25 years of experience, which means I know the difference between legitimate authority and criminal fraud. What you've witnessed tonight is a desperate embezzler facing federal prison time, making her final attempt to blame everyone except herself for stealing your community's money." The crowd erupted in applause while Detective Violet approached Bethany with obvious relief. The arrest was anticlimactic. She'd exhausted herself screaming and offered no resistance as the handcuffs clicked into place. As they led her out, Bethany made one final declaration to the news cameras. "This isn't over. The truth will come out. That judge destroyed an innocent woman. The community center erupted in a standing ovation that lasted 5 full minutes. Justice had finally been served, with a side of public humiliation and criminal prosecution. 6 months later, Willowbrook Estates had transformed from a suburban dictatorship into something that actually resembled a community where people smiled at each other instead of measuring their fence heights. The morning air now carried the sound of children laughing instead of Bethany's aggressive heel clicks on asphalt. Margaret was elected HOA president unanimously, running on the revolutionary platform of no more measuring tapes and actual human decency. Winston became secretary, ensuring meetings followed proper procedures without requiring a law degree to participate. The scent of fresh coffee and homemade cookies replaced the sterile smell of fear that had permeated our neighborhood gatherings. The legal resolution was everything we'd hoped for and more. Bethany pled guilty to embezzlement, wire fraud, and filing false police reports, receiving 2 years in state prison, 5 years probation, and full restitution of $47,000 plus interest. Her real estate license was permanently revoked, and she was banned from serving on any HOA board statewide. Dale filed for divorce 3 days after sentencing, finally free from years of living with a woman who'd turned neighborhood management into organized crime. But the most beautiful outcome was what we did with the recovered money. The Willowbrook Community Enhancement Fund transformed Bethany's stolen BMW payments and spa treatments into genuine community improvements. We built a playground where children could actually play without architectural pre-approval, established scholarships for local students pursuing careers in law and public service, and created a community garden that actively encourages inappropriately whimsical decorations. My personal healing surprised me most. What began as a simple desire for quiet retirement had evolved into something Elena would have cherished, using legal knowledge to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Fighting Bethany's corruption had given me purpose beyond grief, showing me that justice doesn't retire when judges do. Sophia visited more often now, bringing the grandkids to play in our transformed neighborhood. My grandson particularly loved the new swing set, installed without a single violation notice or committee review. The sound of his laughter mixed with autumn breezes reminded me why Elena had dreamed of a place with big trees and friendly neighbors. The ripple effects exceeded our wildest expectations. My case became a teaching example in law schools nationwide for HOA oversight and property rights. I testified before the state legislature about HOA reform, helping pass new laws requiring annual financial audits and board term limits. The story went viral, inspiring similar investigations into neighborhood corruption across the country. Most satisfying was watching our community transform from a place where people feared retrieving their newspapers too slowly into somewhere neighbors actually talked over fences and borrowed cups of sugar without filing permits. Property values increased not through aggressive enforcement, but because people genuinely wanted to live where common sense prevailed over clipboard tyranny. The local newspaper's follow-up feature, Judges Justice, How Legal Knowledge Saved a Community, interviewed dozens of residents who'd suffered under Bethany's manufactured violations. Mrs. Patterson's inappropriately whimsical garden gnomes became local celebrities, with tourists actually stopping to photograph the decorations that had once cost her $1,500 in fabricated fines. As I write this, I'm sitting under my oak tree that drops acorns like nature's artillery, a detail that would have horrified Bethany but now makes me smile every autumn morning. My Honda runs perfectly, parked legally in my driveway without requiring anyone's permission. The musty smell of old legal documents has been replaced by the fresh scent of Elena's favorite flowers, which I finally had time to plant properly. The legal clinic I helped establish now provides free HOA dispute mediation across 3 counties, ensuring future neighborhood dictators face immediate professional resistance rather than intimidated silence. Knowledge really is power, especially when it's used to protect communities from petty corruption. If you've survived your own HOA nightmare, drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and trust me, your neighborhood tyrant probably wasn't as creatively corrupt as ours. Your experiences help other people realize they're not alone in fighting suburban authoritarianism. Subscribe to Karen's Stories for more David versus Goliath tales where knowledge, persistence, and community organizing defeat petty corruption. Because sometimes the best way to honor someone's memory is protecting others the way you wish you could have protected them. Share this with anyone dealing with petty authority run amok. Sometimes all it takes is someone who knows the rules better than the bullies do. Justice served, community restored, and one judge's retirement finally fulfilled his wife's dream of quiet neighbors, big trees and inappropriately whimsical garden decorations.